Welcome to a Legendarium special about Francois l'Olonnais, the Flail of the Spanish. In this episode, we will learn about one of the bloodiest pirates ever to sail the waterways of the Caribbean. For such an infamous man, we know little about l'Olonnais. We do know he was born Jean David now sometime between 1630 and 1635 in Les Sables d'Olonne on the western coast of France. His desperately poor parents sold him as an indentured servant when he turned 15. This would give them some money and their son a chance at a fresh start in the Americas. After a grueling sea voyage, he worked a plantation in the French-ruled island of Martinique. By some chance, he wound up in the hands of a Spaniard who lived and farmed on the island of Hispaniola, now the Dominican Republic. During his 9 years' hard labor in the sweat-sticky Caribbean, Jean David Nau's masters encouraged him to work harder with beatings and whippings. During this time, he learned of a wild band of hunters who lived on the island of Tortuga. These men, known as Buccaneers, smoked cattle and boar meat on grills kept within small huts. As soon as he could, Nau fled his Spanish masters and joined these rough-and-ready men. By then, l'Olonnais had become inured to hardship and nursed a deep and abiding hatred of the Spanish. Among the Buccaneers now became known as Francois l'Olonnais after his hometown and a protege of their governor, Monsieur de la Place. De la Place led other Buccaneers in building canoes to take Spanish ships. Over 2 or 3 short voyages, l'Olonnais impressed de la Place enough with his courage and ruthlessness to receive command of his own ship sometime during the mid-1660s, along with a shiny new license to plunder the Spanish. France and Spain fought often during l'Olonnais' lifetime, which gave him many prospects for plunder in the name of king and country. L'Olonnais learned naval tactics, like using one ship to open fire upon his Spanish prey, while he took a small canoe around to board the Spanish from behind. However, l'Olonnais became a man with a heart of ice and a boundless appetite for blood, especially Spanish blood. While wiser captains showed mercy to crews that surrendered to encourage other ships to give up without a fight, l'Olonnais did not prove a wise man. Spaniards began fighting him to the death rather than surrendering and dying a far worse death at his hands. In 1667, l'Olonnais disembarked on the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula in modern-day Mexico. The local indigenous tribe learned of his arrival, and they ambushed his party and rained arrows upon them. As his men fell one by one, l'Olonnais tumbled to the ground, rubbed blood on his face, rolled in the sand, and played dead. The victorious warriors failed to notice that l'Olonnais still breathed, and their Spanish masters would weep tears of blood for this error. L'Olonnais then stole a canoe from African slaves and rowed back to Tortuga. By then, most buccaneers believed him dead, and men hailed his return as a miracle. Cloaked in this new mystique, it became easy for l'Olonnais to recruit a new party for a voyage against the town of Los Cayos in Spanish-ruled Cuba. The governor of Havana sent a 10-gun ship to intercept l'Olonnais. Instead, l'Olonnais and his men caught the warship unawares and seized it. He took 87 prisoners, tying them hand and foot. He then slowly walked up the line of captives, beheading each man with a cutlass, only stopping to sharpen his blade after every 5 or 6 murders. L'Olonnais left only one alive to carry a message back to Havana. In revenge for the massacre of his men on Yucatan, l'Olonnais would give no quarter to any Spaniard that he encountered. L'Olonnais returned to Tortuga, his reputation now so great that he recruited 700 men for a pleasure cruise to South America, namely the Gulf of Maracaibo, home to rich coastal towns. In September 1667, l'Olonnais took a fleet of 8 Buccaneer ships and captured Spanish galleons hauling cocoa, precious stones, and best of all, muskets and ammunition. Loloné then fell upon the Spanish town of Maracaibo. During the siege that followed, Loloné allowed one of his Spanish prisoners to return on the condition he tell his countrymen that Loloné led 2,000 men instead of the actual 700 he led. Panic spread and the citizens disappeared. After taking Maracaibo, Loloné headed south to Gibraltar and took it as well, though the citizens had already fled with their valuables, which the pirates had come to plunder. To persuade a few Spanish prisoners to share the hiding place with him, Loloné tied a rope around their heads and tightened it until their eyes popped out of their sockets. Next, he slowly sliced bits of flesh off each man, gradually growing the size of the cuts until he took off whole limbs, which were by then missing chunks of flesh and had stumps for fingers. This encouraged a little friendly talk, and Loloné learned that the Spanish fled to the swamps. Torture, rape, and theft followed until Loloné left the Spaniards with nothing but their lives, which they soon lost to starvation when the Buccaneers left. Loloné split 260,000 pieces of 8 among his men. They spent it speedily in the brandy shops and bordellos of Port Royal and Tortuga. Thanks to his new fame, Loloné put together another expedition, yet he now faced an enemy he could not defeat or torture into submission: his own delusions of grandeur. After so many bloody victories, Loloné now dreamed of conquering Spanish Nicaragua and making himself king. Recruiting another 700 buccaneers, Loloné plundered the Central American coast, invading indigenous villages, taking what little they had, and burning their boats. Loloné left them to starve, with nothing left but hatred for the invader. Next, Loloné met a 20-gun Spanish ship at Puerto de Cabello. He seized the ship, but Loloné really wanted San Pedro, which he planned on making his capital. He plunged into the green inferno of the Honduran rainforest, teeming with spiders, snakes, and Spanish snipers. In one infamous story, the Buccaneer came across a Spanish barracks. He cut out the heart of one captive, chewed a bit off, and stuffed it into the mouth of another prisoner. This persuaded the others to give away the Spanish positions, and Loloné slipped past them to seize San Pedro. Yet he could not stay with his men dropping dead from malaria. After returning to the coast, his crew captured yet another Spanish ship, only to find its cargo hold emptier than the King of Spain's head. Anger turned to mutiny. Several other captains, sensing that this voyage would bring them no gold, abandoned Loloné with only his own ship and 400 loyal men. Loloné sailed south only to be shipwrecked on a sandbar at Punta Mono. The vengeful indigenous nations that he ruined before now placed him under siege. Disease, snakebite, and native arrows whittled Loloné's numbers down to 150. Desperate, Loloné built a barge from the remains of his ship. He made it into the sea, but a Spanish ship drove him into the Isthmus of Panama, some of the densest jungle on earth. Loloné met the Kuna nation there, a cannibal people who decided to invite Loloné to dinner. The Kuna chopped him up and threw him limb by limb into the fire. They then burned his bones to ashes so no trace of him would remain. A fittingly bloody end for a bloody man. Well known in his time and greatly feared by the Spanish, Loloné might be better known today if he had not been followed in history by the greatest pirate of all, Captain Henry Morgan. Yet while the French spoke little about Loloné, the English-speaking world revered Henry Morgan, even though he was probably harder on the Spanish than Loloné. And Loloné's life shows that most pirates of the Caribbean were not lovable rogues or wronged noblemen trying to reclaim their birthright, but bloodthirsty psychopaths who did not want to work a regular job, so they lived at the tragic expense of others. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.